Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a minute or two. If you haven't already done so, please put in the chat where you're from. It's always nice to see.
It's the closest we ever come to traveling these days. Oh, greetings from Croatia. I'm going in 3 weeks on vacation, fingers crossed. Hello, Croatia.
Oh, you're from everywhere. It's so nice to see you.
Prague.
Very nice. Okay, I think let's get started. So hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session called Summer Slide, Myth or Reality. Today, we will be hearing from Autumn Westphal and Mike Mayer. Autumn is a senior learning designer at Pearson, specializing in the development of outcomes-focused, evidence-based English language teaching curricula and content. Her background is in teacher training and developing relevant professional development for language teachers. Mike Mayer is the Director for Learning, Research, and Design at Pearson. In this role, Mike works with content and assessment teams to ensure that GSE learning objectives underpin all of our new products and services. Mike has a BA in French language and literature and a master's in English and applied linguistics from Cambridge University. As some quick housekeeping before we get started, we will be having a short Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. So please feel free to submit your questions in the questions box at any time during the talk. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Certificates of attendance will be sent out in the days following this session. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and available shortly after the session in case you would like to share it with colleagues. And now I'm happy to pass it over to Autumn and Mike.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
I was like, oh, who's starting? I'm not sure.
We're like 1, 2, 3, talk at the same time.
Yeah, always.
Hi. I'm Autumn, and this is
Mike. Well spotted. Okay.
And we will be talking to you today about Summer Slide, Myth or Reality. But before we really dig in, we would like as many people as possible to join our Slido. So on your phone, on your computer, on your device, go to slido.com and then enter in our code, which is 944943. I'm going to advance it to the next slide because you can also just scan the QR code on your screen with your phone's camera and it will bring you right to this poll. So our first poll today is Summer Slide, Myth or Reality. I see someone has already entered and put in reality. So let's see what the rest of you think. We got 3 people, 6 people joining. Ooh.
And just to add in there, Autumn, if people can't join Slido or don't want to join Slido, please feel free to type your answer into the chat box and I will monitor to see what's coming in on chat.
Great. I'll just take a moment. If anyone, we still have lots of lovely hellos coming in on the chat. Hello, hello, hello. We have 53 people in our Slido. Yep. All right, we have, thank you, Inez. If anyone else would like to use the chat function or the Slido function, either one is fine. Just going to get a feel for how we are split. We will be using the Slido throughout the session. So if you can access it now, keep it open on your phone because we will be activating a few other surveys and polls.
Okay, I'm seeing just realities on chat.
Yep.
No myths.
We have a small percentage of myths in the actual Slido.
Okay.
So interesting. Most people say it's a reality. Some people say it's a myth. So let's find out, which is it, myth or reality? So objectives for the session. We will define summer slide and discuss if it's a myth or reality. Yeah, keep your ideas coming in the chat. They can keep flowing in as we continue. We're going to discuss ways in which to minimize the impact of summer break. We're going to look at ways in which Pearson is helping to support teachers on the return to school. So first, let's get into that first question. Summer slide, is it a myth? Oh, wait, before we get into a myth or reality, I will tell you that in this session, we are considering that it is a reality. So for those of you who answered myth, let's see if we change your mind through this session and give you some good strategies for dealing with it. So summer slide is definitely something that we feel we need to deal with or lessen the impact of something. You know, we leave, we say goodbye to our students, they have a big break. So let's see, how confident do you feel at the moment lessening that impact when you come back in the fall? Get a little confidence rating here. Again, you can scan the QR code. You could also put a number into the chat. So 1 would be not very confident, and 5 would be very, very confident. So for those of you who are putting 5, excellent. We're going to have a chance at the end of the session for everyone to share some strategies that we may not have covered. And so that's really good to have people at varied levels of confidence in the session. Looks like we are comfortably at a majority of 3s and 4s, which is a good place to be. Means you have some great strategies in your toolbox, but perhaps we can give you a few more things to think about in the session. And if you still would like to participate, but put it into the chat, you are more than welcome to. Looks like our average is 3.9. That's good. That means that you may be teaching Mike and I something new towards the end of the session too. So that's excellent. All right, great. I'm going to close this poll. Feel free to continue to put into the chat if you would like, and we're going to move on. So what is summer slide? Now, I'm sure you all have your own working definition of this. Basically, it's a phrase used to describe the learning our students lose, like a sock behind the washer, over the summer months when they have been set free from the classroom. And it's often used in the K through 12 sector, but of course it can apply to any level of learning when you have a large break in between the end of the spring semester, the beginning of the fall semester, etc. So we as human beings are just not that great at remembering things in general. We'll get into this in a little bit when I hand it over to Mike. But thinking about summer slide specifically, there's been a lot of research done on it, particularly in the K through 12 space, and thinking about this loss of learning and why it happens in between the end of school and the beginning of school. And 2 researchers carried out a study recently in 2017. And they found a lot of things out about summer slide, particularly that what you learn in school and what you achieve in school is perishable over time. The average student can lose up to a month of an academic calendar year each summer. And the fact is also that summer slide can impact students at different socioeconomic statuses, depending on how much learning they have access to at home or during the summer. So they did find a link between the severity of the summer slide and the socioeconomic status of a learner. Another thing, as I'm sure all of us who are continuing on our journey and this crazy thing called life can agree that the older the learner, the more we lose over time. And also, what we're going to talk about in a little bit is basically the researchers found that the impact of summer slide is often increased when the faucet of learning is turned off. So something we're going to explore a little bit later is about keeping that faucet of learning on during the summer. But before I get into too much detail, I'm going to hand it over to Mike to dig into that memory bit.
Yeah, thanks, Autumn. So memory, the human brain, it's a pretty complex and amazing thing, but as Autumn has pointed out, we are prone to forgetting, and we forget some things and we remember others. And obviously as educators, we want to focus on What is it about the things that we remember that make us remember? And I know today we're focusing on summer slide, but it struck me as we were pulling together this webinar that actually there's, as a teacher, I remember the weekend slide as well, where you come back Monday and students often seem to have not remembered what you covered on Friday. And then, of course, we've got the much bigger, not so much a slide, but all the news reports that have gone out there about the lost learning during the pandemic. And that's, we're not really going to touch on that, but that's also a big sort of topic at the moment around, what's been going on while we've been trying to do emergency remote teaching and learning. But anyway, let's dig into memory a bit more. And there's been a number of research projects over the years. And I am going to set you a little memory challenge, okay? And obviously, I trust you all implicitly to not cheat when we do this. But what I'm going to do, or what Autumn's going to do in a minute, is show you 8 letters. And I want you to remember, you're going to see them for 10 seconds. And I want you to remember those letters without writing anything down. So this is a test of memory. Okay, so I'm going to count you down, Autumn, and then we'll show them the 8 letters, 10 seconds, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So 3. Oh, there we go. Going back. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Show the letters. Okay, 10 seconds. Move on. Okay, that was your 10 seconds. Don't write anything down. Hold those 8 letters in your memory. Now, that's already, I think, quite challenging enough, but life doesn't just give you one piece of information and you just focus on that one piece of information. And we don't have something we've taught before summer and then students don't focus on anything else during summer. So now you're going to have to answer these next 2 questions before we work on the next.
Wait. Sorry, Mike. No, don't put it in the chat. Stop. The whole point is to try and keep it in your brain while we have the next experience. So ignore everything that's gone into the chat. Everybody hold it in your head. Don't worry. It's okay. Don't apologize. But
I'm glad Teacher Westphal is monitoring the chat.
Thank you. I know, spoiler alert. It's okay if you already saw it. Now make a promise not to scroll up. So see here.
Don't look at the chat.
All of this time. Don't worry. It's okay. All right, keep it in your head. And now we're gonna go into the next experience.
Okay. That is fully simulated all the activity that goes on during the summer. So we have a little quiz about some research that was carried into memory, and Autumn is showing you the questions that we're going to ask on the screen now. As she said, there is a Slido poll, but for people who are not accessing Slido, those are the 2 questions we're going to be asking. So how much do you remember after an hour of being exposed to something, a piece of learning? And then how much do you remember after a month? So a month has gone by. Okay, do you want to bring up the Slido polls, Autumn, and we'll do the first one. And if you can click into the so join the Slido. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. So I'm gonna move it on to the survey after people have some time to answer, because once I reveal it, the correct answers will be there. So go on and then join the Slido. In the chat, you can think, how much do you remember after 1 hour? 80, 60, 40, or 20? How much do you remember after 1 month? 80, 60, 40, or 20. So we have 60, 40, 40, 20, 60, 60, 20. Very good. So we have less than 1 hour first, and afterwards. And we can see a trend here that people have identified. You remember more after an hour and less after a month, but how much? So let's reveal. We've got 65 people, 66 in so far. So let's see what we have here.
Okay, after 1 hour, majority of people are saying 60%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the correct answer is actually the green one. Yes, 40%.
Yes.
Okay, so after 1 hour, that's quite, I guess, surprising / shocking that 1 hour after you've taught something, your students have a 40% chance of remembering. Give us the depressing answer to 1 month then, given that summer vacation is probably longer than a month. Okay, and most people agreed with that. I can't actually see the number on my screen because
20%, 55% of people said 20% after 1 month. So I feel like we're a bit optimistic. As someone said it in the chat, we're so optimistic at how much people remember after 1 hour.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on from those depressing pieces of data. So now is your opportunity. Do not click send. Do not click send, but see if you can put those 8 letters into the chat now. And when I say send, I haven't said it, but when I say send, then click send. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to write down the 8 letters in the correct order, please. And with upper and lowercase as they were presented on the screen. So I know, it's just a bit of fun. Don't get too upset about it. So you can set, oh, people are sending, so send now. My instructions are way too complicated. Okay, so I'm seeing people that actually their memory, well, we've not had a full hour, have we? So maybe, but do you want to show the answer, Autumn? That was the order in which they were presented. And I have to say, we have some pretty good memories. Excellent, given all the confusion that happened between the memorizing and the, so maybe at the end of the session, you can tell us how you remembered those. Did you, was it a mnemonic? Did you
put a mnemonic in there?
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, because of spoilers, I remembered it. So there's also the fact that we did have spoilers, and sometimes if you write something down first and then press send, you're more likely to remember it better after a period of time. So I think everybody has some nice volcano. Ooh, interesting.
Oh, somebody saw volcano. Okay, so that was just a little bit of fun. Moving us along, Autumn. Yeah, so I said some research has been carried out, and you can look at the date of this piece of research. It's not the most recent, but it's possibly one of the most famous, which is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and that's where the data for our polls came from. This research has been discredited by some researchers since then, mainly because the sample size was 1 person, and that was himself. However, there have been quite a few other studies that have, shown the same effect, maybe not exactly the same data, but over time we forget. And so what we are looking at really is, how can we lessen this curve? How can we help to remember? And what we're going to talk about now really is, it comes from the learning research that Autumn and I are involved in, not necessarily our own research, but the research that's been done by the English, other topic areas, that research community, and that we take this information, distill it into a learning framework that Autumn will share with you, and bake it into our products. But I thought before we looked at actual concrete examples, it'd be quite interesting to understand what are some of the factors that help to lessen the forgetting. Okay, so one of the answers to the questions that we're posing is, how do we lessen the forgetting curve, the summer slide? Well, the first thing we want to look at is, what can we do before summer to ensure that memory is being engaged at a maximum? So we're not just working with, let's call it surface level memory, but we are getting to a deeper learning. And when we move to deep learning, we have more chances of being able to retrieve that information after a longer period of time. And then we're just going to call out a few of the factors which play into this. And so the first one is, I'm sure this will come as no surprise to teachers, is that you recycle. You need to recycle the information you're teaching. Nobody learns something from one exposure to a new word, a new piece of grammar, a new language function. And, you know, we recycle it in different contexts. Maybe you start off receptively, so you're recognizing the language, and you move to more productive use of the language. And I think the interesting thing from the research is that recycling and repetition, it showed to be most impactful and most effective if you space the learning. So don't just repeat the same thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You repeat it at intervals that gradually get longer. And this is definitely something that we build into, for example, our courses. When we build the courses, we'll have language functions which occur, you know, at the beginning of a level. They're recycled in a different context in the middle, then they're revisited in a higher level of the courseware. So this is pretty tried and tested research now, and we bake that into the products we create. So recycling and spacing the learning. The second thing is really making the learning meaningful. And by that, I mean contextualizing the learning. That was really unfair of me to drop 8 random letters and ask you to memorize those. No context. Why am I memorizing them? What do these 8 letters? They have no meaning. And how much easier would it have been if I'd have shown you the 8 letters in this formation? And somebody used volcano, but actually they were just vacation. See what I did? Summer camp, summer, yeah, anyway. Vacation scrambled in a different order. But if I'd shown you those letters, I mean, you already did a pretty good job at remembering them. I'm pretty sure 100% of you would have remembered vacation. Why? Because it has a meaning that is attached to something in the real world, and you've been exposed to it many, many, many times. So again, that's a bit of a superficial example, but I just wanted to use it to illustrate the fact that if something has a meaning, if you can attach something to something in your experience, something in the real world, it's going to be easier to learn, memorize, and retrieve at a later point. Autumn, I think I'm going to hand over to you for the next few pointers.
Okay, so building off of what Mike was just saying is that in addition to making things meaningful, we want students to connect them to what they already know. So if you're teaching something new, we're going to remind them of what they already know connected to this. If you're teaching something that is the next step of something, we're going to remind them of the previous step so that then they can slot that new information into the existing information. Again, like Mike said, I don't think any of this is, I think this is going to be very familiar to many of you, because it's these teaching best practices. It's what we do to prevent the summer slide that really makes a huge difference. Okay, moving on. So Another thing building off of meaningfulness is that personalization. So we are also making sure that the use of language has relevance to the learner. So we could be teaching the same content to a variety of learners, but the way we message that content is going to be different based off of the learner's own personal experience, and making times in your lessons to allow learners to individualize what they are learning. Then we move on to setting clear learning objectives. So, and if we were gonna, we're kind of starting about like the macro structure of the learning and then how we make that learning meaningful with previous knowledge and personalization, but it's all wrapped under this big umbrella of making sure you have clear objectives for each lessons and the students know what these objectives are so that they can also take ownership and have some kind of self-driven motivation in terms of achieving those objectives. So, you may recognize John Hattie, a well-known name in the field. He says, simply tell students what they will be learning before a lesson begins, and you can raise student achievement as much as 27%. I have a personal example from one of my master's professors actually was working with another trainee who was a little bit hesitant to share her learning objectives with her students, worrying that it was going to be too much information for them to handle. And she just wanted them to focus on the lesson. So he said, okay, let's do a post poll. Teach your whole lesson and then ask your students at the end of the lesson what they thought the goal of the lesson was. And so she did that. And then what she got really surprised her. Out of a class of 15 students, only 2 students identified the actual learning objective. The rest of the students thought that the main point of the lesson were things that were tangential that came up in the lesson, but were the most meaningful to those students. So she was teaching a lesson on adverbs of frequency, and 2 students realized that, and other students thought that they were, I don't know, learning about experiences, or they were learning how to cook something, or they were learning how to do that. It was really interesting. Some of them focused. So getting those learning objectives and setting those learning objectives are essential because students are more likely to remember something if they know what they're actually learning. I'm going to hand it over to Mike now to talk a little bit about how Pearson has helped you with that solution for your learning objectives with the global scale of English.
Yes, a little shameless plug for the work that I've been doing for the past 8 years now. So yes, making sure that those learning objectives have been shared by students, shown to have a really significant impact on what is actually learned, and that old adage, we can teach but they don't necessarily learn, right? So and I mean that's about setting the learning in context. With lower level students, I see no problem with actually telling them what the learning objective is in their first language, if that's more useful, if that's possible. This is not about a test of their English. This is about contextualizing what the lesson's going to be about and really answering their question, why am I here? What are we doing today? What is the focus of this lesson? And so in order to support teachers with this, I'm sure a number of you are familiar with the Common European Framework. And so in a nutshell, the Global Scale of English is really an extension of the Common European Framework with hundreds and hundreds more learning objectives to help teachers with lesson planning and syllabus creation and curriculum design. The toolkit that you can see on the screen there, and that you can see the link, but if you just put a GSE teacher toolkit into a search engine, I'm sure you'll find it as well. And this is, I like to think of this as like a one-stop shop for teachers, because you've got the learning objectives, which, really important to share with your students. We also have grammar objectives, learning objectives for grammar. There are 2 vocabulary databases in there, again, for young learners and adults. Why did I say again? Because I forgot to mention in learning objectives, we have 4 sets of learning objectives for adults, learning general English, academic English, business English, but also young learners. So if you're teaching young learners, there is a dedicated set of learning objectives for young learners. In the vocabulary, we have a database for young learners, but also for adults. And then a new feature, which is a text analyzer, which I can talk a little bit more at the end if we have time, And also, if anybody wants to find out more about the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, I did give a webinar in this same summer series a couple of weeks ago, and you will be able to go back and watch the recording of that. So if you're interested in that, I will just send you back to that recording, because I think we've still got quite a bit to get through in this particular webinar. Thanks, Autumn.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Can't say enough good things about the Global Scale of English, to be honest.
No.
All right, so now what do we have left? Regular checking of understanding. So you have your learning objectives, you have your beautifully scaffolded and recycled lessons that are personalized and meaningful, and then you plan your formative assessments throughout, so that from those formative assessments, you can see how much your students are remembering over time. And you can even plan your formative assessments, of course, within the lesson, but out of the lesson to kind of correspond to your spaced learning approach, so that you can see how well that spaced learning is actually helping your students remember the information that you've been teaching them. And finally, get the learners to reflect on what they've learned and encourage them to take ownership of their own learning. I know that this can be a really big challenge depending on the students, depending on their goal for learning, depending on their age, depending on whether the learning is mandatory or voluntary. So many different factors can influence this. But just as you're assessing your students and checking their understanding, students can also take ownership of assessing their learning and checking their own understanding. So how does this all come together? All of these concepts of fighting the learning curve during the school year kind of play into something that we have at Pearson called the learning framework. So you can see here, we have our outcomes and objectives at the beginning, we have our summative assessment at the end, and in the middle is where our learning and instruction happens. And then you see, we have our introduce prior knowledge bit, we have our develop knowledge and skills, which is where our personalization comes in, which is where our meaningfulness comes in, and our recycling and our spaced repetition comes in. And then we have our deepen and connect, and a lot of our students' ownership of their learning and checking in on their own learning. All of that comes into play in these bubbles here. I often think about this as the learning couch, because I also think it looks like a really comfortable piece of furniture. And then again, underneath, we have our formative assessment and reflection. So what does this look like in practice? Well, we have this in practice in all of our courseware is built off of these concepts. So here we're going to show you an example of how this is manifest in Roadmap. So here we have our outcomes and objectives stated at the beginning of the lesson in clear, easy to understand language, so that the students can also read these and understand what they are and what they mean. Then we also introduce the new content and build on prior knowledge before we dig into anything. Then we move on to developing knowledge and skills through meaningful and contextualized practice with sentences that students would hear and see and use in the real world, and encouraging pair work and interaction and allowing the students to make meaning out of what they're learning. And then we move on to the deepen and connect phase, where they get to consolidate everything in some sort of meaningful, productive task like speaking or writing. Then at the end of everything, we have our formative assessment for the teacher, as well as our reflection and checking for the students, so that not only are you checking in with the students' learning, but the students have the structure available to them to reflect and check their own learning throughout the learning process. Oh my goodness. Apologies, I'm having a little bit of a delay, a lag on my computer. Okay, and you can see here, we also, a key to reflection is providing this rubric, so that when the students are self-reflecting, they actually have this structure to follow, so that they understand what kind of how to assess themselves and what the guidelines are for that. And sometimes that's broken down into a score, like in this case here. So now that we've talked about a lot with pre-summer, let's talk about a couple things we can do during the summer, building off of the idea I mentioned above at the beginning of the session, where I talked about keeping the faucet on, because many times the start of summer is the turning off of the tap or the faucet of learning. So we want to have some strategies to keep that water running. So what can we do during summer vacation? So first idea, and I just have a few ideas here, and I'm really hoping that at the end of the session, when we open up the doors for all of you to share your strategies, we'll have more to build on here. So first, use your learning management system. If there's one good thing that happened during the pandemic is that we all got online, and now we have this learning management system in place that then we can mine for better communication with our students and with our parents, or with our older students or learners, or whoever you are serving. So set up optional assignments for summer break. Even if the students don't do them, you have them there for them. You're creating a buffet for the students so that you're keeping the faucet on. If the students don't take part in it, that is up to the students or the parents. So depends on what age you're working on. Also, have a resource bank. So even if you don't set up additional assignments, what you can do in your learning management system is set up a bank of resources that either are applications that your school has a license for, or even free family versions of apps or free user version of apps, so that you can just suggest more things so that students can create their own summer plan. And finally, if you have the time and you have the ability, you can set up once every month or so an optional check-in where everybody in class can come in, see each other, say hi, and you can check in with your students one-on-one at that time too. Some other ideas: get the parents or the older learners involved. So this is also building off of the learning management system idea. And this is just if you can. I understand that there are barriers. There is the idea that not all students have technological access and all of this sort of thing. So sometimes with your learning management system, if you create this whole beautiful thing online, you also may want to have a print version of that, like a resource bank or what have you, that you can actually physically give to the students too, if they won't have internet or devices over the summer. So in your final conference with parents and or students, go over the summer plan and resources you have available online and offline. Put community resources at their fingertips too. So for example, libraries, free programs through zoos, free local English programs that you know about. And then again, you're just taking those digital resources that you have and then just making sure that the students have those. And then if you have like a corresponding bank of digital and or in the community resources, it's even better, because not all of your learners will be able to access things equally when they are no longer in school. And that closes that, and I'm going to hand it off back to Mike.
Thank you. Before we move on to the assessing the slide, I was just going to add to the keeping the faucet on, or the tap as we call it over here. And maybe this is a bit controversial, but I was thinking that as teachers of English, I think you have a bit of an easier job than, say, a teacher of maths or chemistry trying to keep the faucet on during the summer break. Why do I say that? Because I'm personally not a great believer in giving, I'm talking about K-12 now, giving kids, work to do over summer. I mean, they've got other things to do during summer and other skills to learn, and just they're probably not going to do it. English is like a medium to so much that I suspect genuinely interests them. So if you think about all the music that's out there in English, the films that are out there in English. I studied French. I used to be given copies of Paris Match to read over the summer. It was way above my level of, I just looked at the pictures basically. But for English, you've got graded readers if somebody's into reading. Social media is all in English. Gaming is often in English. So there are so many where it's not formal, but it is exposure to English. And just that exposure will help just keep, keep their ear in, keep their eye in. They're going to recognize some words depending on their level, I think. But, feel free to disagree with me at the end when you put in your comments. So we've done, how can we make teaching as impactful as possible before summer? A few little ideas on what we could do during summer. But you know what? This webinar's come a little bit late for next year, hasn't it? Because I suspect some of you are going to be going back to school very soon now. September, usually in the UK, probably different times around the world. So, like, where do you start off having appreciated this summer slide? And so, Autumn, if you would just want to advance, and we can give a couple of suggestions. So what can we do? One of the things we can do, and one of the things that Pearson can support you with, is taking the guesswork out of, what have the students remembered? Okay, I think we need to, and again, this is really challenging in a K-12 system where you have a curriculum to get through, but we really need to resist the temptation to simply take off where we finished at the end of last year, because we know there's going to be things that have been forgotten. So how do we assess the current knowledge of our students? I think the next one. And when we talk about knowledge, this is where it becomes a bit tricky, more tricky. I'm not a maths expert, I don't know. But this is where it becomes tricky for language, because you have knowledge of the language, which is important. You need to know your vocabulary, you need to know your grammar, but then it's knowing how to use the language. So English as a functional skill. And that is really quite difficult to assess and quite time consuming to assess. And which is why when I make a massive generalization, people tend to go with multiple choice grammar and vocabulary tests because they're easy to create, they're easy to mark. But does that knowledge really tell us where our students are? So Pearson's done a lot of work into seeing how can we assess easily the functional proficiency of learners, but not so much for the sake of like grading them, but identifying where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses. And so, Autumn, if you just click on to the next slide, one of the digital tests that we have is called the Versant English Placement Test. It's on off-the-shelf digital solution that can be used in the classroom. It teaches all four skills, assesses all four skills: listening, reading, speaking, writing. It's all automatically scored, and you get rich score reports. So what do I mean by rich? If you want to advance, Autumn, the rich score reports. Suspense is killing me. Okay, so this is an example of a rich score report. So you would get an overall score on the global scale of English. Remember the two-teacher toolkit I was plugging before? And a description of what that kind of means, the overall language ability. You can see there's a very visual chart to show the different levels of proficiency of different skills. Nobody is going to have what we call an even profile. Everybody is better in one skill than another skill. So that helps you to pinpoint where maybe the weaknesses are, even if it's not at an individual level, but at the whole class level. And then in 21st century, we also, it's quite useful to know what the students' digital fluency is like. So you also get a little bit of additional information around their typing speed and accuracy, which you can ignore, but actually it's been identified as one of the future skills. And then on the next page, this is where it gets, I think, even more interesting and even richer. So the information is broken down by the skills, provides you with tips on where what the student can do to improve that particular skill. And if you're using a particular Pearson course book, so Autumn was showing you examples before from Roadmap. So if you're using Roadmap, you just key Roadmap into your login page, and it will actually give you recommendations within the course book that you're using to give to the students in order for them to improve that particular skill. And those are things that they can do themselves. So you can actually do that at an individual rather than in the classroom basis, because everybody's going to have remembered and forgotten different things. So that's just one example of one of the proficiency tests that Pearson's produced, really to try and it's formative assessment in that it's testing students in order to impact future teaching. It's not assessment, summative, end of the year, we don't do anything with it. This is supposed to help you to inform your teaching going forward. And moving on, oh, there we go, links to the courseware. So what we've been talking about today, and I think we're just about on time, so not bad, is really the learning cycle and how we can, points during the learning cycle where we can try and have as much impact as possible in order to reduce summer slide, weekend slide, pandemic slide, every slide, just in order to improve retention and deep learning, or to mention the deep learning. That's where you want to get to with learning the language, because it means you can then use it in different contexts and you can use it creatively and you can use it more spontaneously. And that's how you improve in proficiency. And so the GSE, Global Scale of English, shamelessly plugging again, can help you with this. So when you're planning, we have the teacher toolkit. Teaching and learning, you have the courseware. For checking, you have the various proficiency tests, which help you then to repair and identify the strengths and weaknesses. And then we have summative assessments as well that you can, if your students want or would like certification at the end of their course. So that really is kind of an overview of some of the learning research that we have on the most impactful teaching and learning. And I mentioned briefly at the beginning lost learning during the pandemic, and there are some quite I think depressing stories and articles out there and pieces of research which talk about, you know, how much actual learning took place when everybody was panicking and trying to suddenly start teaching online, and the students didn't have the right infrastructure and the computers and the blah, 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 blah. And it was depressing, depressing, depressing. Every year, Pearson carries out a learner survey and a teacher survey. And I thought, because I don't want to finish on a depressing note, that it would be nice to share with you two highlights that came out of the learner survey from 2021. So it's a survey of that awful year that everybody's been through, where they were distance learning, distance teaching. And, you know, the good news is there may have been some knowledge gaps, but actually students gained in other ways. So 75% of students reported, either themselves or their parents reported, that they've become more empathetic, more caring because of this pandemic. And they've also needed to build on their own kind of soft skills. So they're more resilient, they are more self-motivated, they are more adaptable, and they've improved in digital skills. So I think really it's hard to look back over the past year and think positively about what everybody has had to go through. But I think these are really nice indications that not all learning is formal. It's happening informally, it's happening at the weekend, it's happening at home, it's happening during the summer. Maybe it just doesn't fit exactly into the curriculum, but you might argue that actually these skills that have been learned are as important, if not more important, than anything that's on the curriculum. Autumn, I don't know if you want to add anything before we... Oh, you've got more polls, I'd forgotten. Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything. You said it perfectly. So before we open up to the Q&A, we have a final poll. And again, you can go into the Slido, which I'll bring up in a moment, or you can use the chat. Let's see if we already started the session at 3s and 4s. So I don't expect we will have too much of a confidence shift, but let's see what happens. And then finally, now we have a chance to have a running list of all of the different strategies that you currently use. So we would love to have a look at those. So I'm going to open this up now. And let's go into the first one. So let's see, in the Slido or in the chat, any shift in confidence with the strategies that Mike and I have shared? Whoa.
That looks big, but that's only 2 people. Okay, now it's changed.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, 4s are great. 4 is actually my favorite number, so that's nice.
Yeah, we're getting 4s in the chat as well.
Yeah. What's nice is that we did have some 1s and 2s at the beginning. If you still are at a 1 and 2, that's absolutely fine. We've only been together for less than an hour, so let's be realistic here. But it looks like we don't have any 1s and 2s anymore. So it looks like some people might have shifted into the 3 zone, which is really nice. All right, I'm going to keep this open for one more moment.
And that's been an hour. So now we'll have a formal test to see how much you remember to validate our... No, I joke. We're not
How do you spell volcano?
Not going to do that.
All right, let's move on to the next. Good, people have already moved on. Let's see.
Wow.
More review, encourage learners to use English, reading list for summer break. Excellent. And like Mike mentioned, we do have a whole slew of graded readers to pull from as well. So that's nice. More review, reading list, make assessments, forms and interactive informal sessions. Great. Yes, making the class more interesting. I see some ideas coming into the chat as well. Yeah, providing the students with reading through the summer is great. And I think Mike's point to mining what the students are going to do anyway, not just reading, not just movies, not just music, but a lot of video games take place in English as well. And if your students are into online gaming, there's going to be a lot of English driven interaction and a lot of English reading as well, unless the games are translated into their target language, which usually doesn't happen. So yeah, we can definitely mine that as well. So even if you assign reading, you can also have the students have an option to do some of their own reading and report back on that with things that they find interesting, reading in video games, reading in whatever.
Yeah. Excellent. And since we're on reading, and I think we've mentioned the graded readers, and it is important to be giving learners reading materials that are at the appropriate level of challenge for them. So nothing that they're going to not be able to read page 1 and then forget it, I'm not reading this. But yes, reading for pleasure, trying to encourage them to read for pleasure. And, if you're having to look up every other word, it's not pleasurable. But I just wanted to do another plug for the teacher toolkit here, because there is a text analyzer in the teacher toolkit now. So if you're looking at reading shorter passages that you will be using in your lessons, maybe your students are particularly interested in something, or there's something topical that you want to cover to engage them, you can find a text on the internet, put it into the text analyzer, and it will tell you what level that text is within like 3 seconds. And so you will see, is it appropriate for my students? Are there some words that I might need to edit out or change or simplify? But that's just one more resource we've did I mention it was free? I don't think I did. It's all absolutely free. Free. It will always be free. Please access it, take a look, and hopefully it can support you in your teaching. I believe we're into Q&A time. I've talked too much. There we go. Start. Yes, we've got Q&A, and I think while we do Q&A, you might want to just advance to the next slide, because then people can see the URL where they would register for additional webinars and also to see the recordings. But yeah, Jen, do you have any
I do.
questions? Yeah.
Yes. So thanks, Autumn and Mike, for a fantastic talk. It's such an interesting topic, and I definitely learned a lot. We do have lots of great questions that came in and just a few minutes left. So if you don't mind, let's go ahead and get started. The first question is, and this one is regarding the course and unit goals. By observing some EFL and ESL teachers, I have noticed that some to none of them shed light on that part. What could be the reason based on your teaching experience? And also, what kind of advice could you give to future teachers?
Say the first bit again. So the EFL and ESL teachers are not using learning objectives, would you say?
Yeah. So they've noticed that some to none of them shed light on that part.
I mean, I think that speaks to what Autumn was giving as her example, that I think a lot of people don't see the benefits. And I myself was a bit surprised by that research result, that it had such an impact, that having worked very closely with the people that created the Common European Framework, who were all acting teachers, I mean, they have the learning objective for the lesson on the wall of the classroom when you walk in. And they change it like every lesson, every day. Autumn, I'm sure you have thoughts.
I mean, I think that sometimes there's also a lot of question, you know, in my experience training ESL, EFL teachers, one thing is that sometimes teachers don't actually know what the goal of the lesson is, or they see the activities themselves as the objectives, as opposed to having an objective like a destination with the activities as a roadmap that leads to that. So sometimes they feel also that the objectives are information for the teacher. And there is a kind of gatekeeping attitude where this is teacher information, not student information. But what's really important is to consider how to break down that wall, because anything that's relevant for you is actually relevant for your teachers. You just have to consider how old they are and their level of English in terms of how much they can understand. But the way you structure, the reason why the activities in a particular order, your students would benefit from that information. How the activities connect to each other, the fact that you're recycling information, the fact that you tell them that you're recycling information at certain intervals, all of this helps them be a better learner. So I feel like a lot of it is that whole gatekeeping. This is information for the teacher, not information for the student. And then sometimes there's a little bit confusion about what the objective is. So some teachers have told the students what the activities are, and they feel like that was the objective, but really that was just the map, not the destination.
And I think it would be a really nice little activity to do when you get back to school. The example that Autumn gave, like teach a lesson and then ask your students what they thought the objective was. See what results you get. Because I thought that was a really interesting anecdote, that actually only 2 out of 15 identified the same objective as the teacher.
Nice. Okay, next question. Is it okay to set the objectives to the students using L1?
I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not about testing their English. This is about focusing, like creating the schema, the context. This is like where the focus of this lesson is. There's going to be other things going on which are important, but where we want to get to is you being able to give directions, or you being able to write a letter of application, or that's our key focus. Yeah, definitely L1 is fine. And I think if you've got young learners,
you have no choice.
Young learners at a low level of proficiency, you don't want to spend the whole lesson explaining what the learning objective is.
I mean, you're basically talking to your cat at that point, or I mean, they just don't know English. I mean, but there are some schools that have certain rules that everything is English only, and they have certain requirements for that. And then the onus is on you. There's tons of research out there that says using a mix of L1 and L2 in the language classroom is beneficial for everyone. So that's when you like put a whole stack of research papers on your director's desk and say, listen, English only instruction is really helpful, but there are certain things like the instructional narrative and the setting the objectives where if the students don't understand it, we can't maximize their learning. So we need to consider the balance of that. Also, of course, this is going to change as your learner's level changes. So like once you get to like a high intermediate advanced level class, you shouldn't have to mix too much L1 into the classroom. But again, you know your students best. But sometimes your school will have a rule and you'll have to figure out how to get around that or have some sort of shift in belief systems.
All right, great. Well, I think we're actually at the top of the hour now. Time has really flown by, but thank you both very much for leading such a wonderful session today. And for everyone who joined us today and all of your interesting questions. Sorry we didn't get a chance to answer a lot of them, but we'll try to follow up after the session. In the next couple of days, we'll be sending you a certificate of attendance and a link to access our resource rucksack, which is filled with lots of amazing free resources. And if you have time and are interested, please join us for more sessions in our Assessment Summer Camp series. The link to learn all about our sessions and to register is listed here on the screen and also in the chats. And on behalf of Autumn and Mike, we hope you have a great rest of the day and stay safe. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.